Hello. I'm Steve Shalom, Director of the Gandhian Forum for Peace and Justice, and I'd like to welcome everyone this afternoon to today's program. The Gandhian Forum is an organization at William Paterson dedicated to encouraging engagement and conversations on ways to make the world a less violent and more just place. In the past, the Gandhian Forum has sponsored programs on economic inequality, on same-sex marriage, on police-community relations, on the Middle East, on the culture of war, on the politics of sports, and many other things. And today we're going to deal with another very important, a critical issue, and that is the issue of abortion and reproductive rights. And we have with us a very distinguished speaker, Katha Pollitt. Before we introduce our speaker, however, I'd like to present the president of William Paterson University, Kathleen Waldron.
Thank you, Professor Shalom. And thank you all for coming today to hear an extraordinary woman who many of us have followed in the press for decades, and I'm so honored to have you on campus, and I want to thank Professor Shalom and all the other sponsors of this event for bringing us such a distinguished speaker. But students, this is the best that William Paterson University offers, the opportunity to hear about current topics of great controversy in this country by some of the most thoughtful speakers and communicators and scholars who have thought about this topic and other topics like it for years. They are national experts. They have opinions you may agree with or disagree with, but the purpose of the talk, the purpose of this gathering of students and faculty is exactly that, to be exposed to controversial ideas, different ideas, ideas and issues of import that are going to be with us as citizens for years to come. And having read Katha Pollitt's work for many years, I've never had the opportunity to hear her speak in person, but you're having that opportunity today, and so I hope you will remember this as sort of a hallmark or a high mark of this semester that you were able to hear such a distinguished speaker at the university today. So I want to thank I'm not going to read all of the co-sponsors of this talk because it includes everybody except one college is missing, and I'm going to talk to them why they didn't sign up. We won't mention them by name, but the support for this talk is very widespread among the campus, and I'm delighted to see so many faculty in the audience today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I'd now like to call on Jean Levitan, a professor in the Department of Public Health and the chair of the William Paterson Faculty Senate, to introduce our speaker.
I am honored to be able to introduce today's guest, Katha Pollitt, one of the country's most distinguished essayists and political columnists. I have been a devoted fan for decades, reading her columns and sharing her words and wisdom with my students as well. Her talk today focuses on abortion, part of the broader discourse within reproductive rights and reproductive justice. Before becoming a professor, I had worked in a New York City abortion clinic prior to 1973's Roe v. Wade decision. I got to see women from all over the United States travel to one of the too few facilities able to provide a safe medical procedure. Knowing of my clinic affiliation, friends of my mother, relatives of my grandmother's generation, shared their own personal stories of resorting to illegal procedures. I'm sure today's conversation will both highlight the past and focus on the very real threats to our choices in the present. Katha Pollitt is a regular contributor to The Nation magazine, where she writes its Subject to Debate column, which, with incisive analysis and sharp humor, has helped many of us to think through some of the toughest issues we face. She has won many prizes and awards for her work, including 2 National Magazine Awards for essays and criticism. Her Nation columns are collected in 3 different books. One, Virginity and Death and Other Social and Political Issues of Our Time. The second, Subject to Debate, Sense and Dissents on Women, Politics, and Culture. And Reasonable Creatures, Essays on Women and Feminism, which was nominated for the National Book Critics Circle Award. She has also published acclaimed books of essays and poetry. In 2010, she received the American Book Award for Lifetime Achievement. She has just recently published a new book called Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights, which was named a New York Times Notable Book of 2014. In this book, she addresses one of the most contentious subjects in the United States today, abortion. And this is the subject of her talk here this afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to present to you Katha Pollitt.
Thank you so much, President Waldron and Steve Shalom and Jean Levitan, for all that wonderful flattery and praise. I'm so thrilled to be here at William Paterson, a college I've never visited, and now it's a whole new world for me with so many interesting people I've already met, and I'm really so thrilled that you're all here to talk about this very important subject that is in the news all the time, where important things are happening almost every day now that will affect the lives of all of us for some time to come. And I'm talking about the wave of restrictions on abortion rights and abortion access that are happening really almost on a daily basis now. If you follow in the press, things that are happening not so much in New Jersey yet, but in Kansas, in Arkansas, in Oklahoma, in the Dakotas, in Missouri. So before, I just want to lay the groundwork a little bit of sort of how urgent this issue is before I talk about my book and other things. Okay, so Missouri. Missouri is a big state. It's got a lot of people in it, like, let's say 4 million women of reproductive age. It now has 1 abortion clinic for the whole state, down from 5 just a few years ago. And recently the legislature passed a 72-hour waiting period. That's 3 days. So what does that mean? That means that if you live over here, you have to get to St. Louis, where the only clinic that performs abortions is, and you have to stay there for 3 days. So that means you have to find a place to live, to stay. That means you have to make several visits to the clinic, to have biased counseling where the doctor is going to tell you a script written by the government, the state government, that says, you know, you really shouldn't be doing this, basically, you're killing your baby. So a procedure that is very simple, that costs around $500, suddenly becomes a procedure that is very complicated and stressful, and that costs around $1,300 because of you needing to find that place to stay, you needing to get there, you needing to find childcare, and take time off from work. It becomes an immensely big deal. And that's the point. These restrictions are being sold to women, or sold to, I shouldn't say they're being sold to women, they're being sold to the public as necessary to protect women's health. But really what they're about is making abortion harder to get. They harm women's health. They push abortions later in pregnancy, for example. In Texas, there's a huge swath around the Rio Grande Valley where all the clinics have been closed, except I think there's 1 open now. And when this was challenged, the judge said, challenged in court on the grounds that it was unfair to women, and the women wouldn't be able to get to the few clinics remaining, that one of the justices, I'm sorry to say a woman, said, Edith Jones of the Fifth Circuit, said, well, they can just drive fast. It's flat. What's 150 miles? Well, what that overlooks is, first of all, 150 miles is a lot. You have to pay for gas and all that. But also, these are very poor women who live in that part of Texas. So, and a lot of them aren't citizens. They don't have papers, and there are checkpoints on the highways. So that what a lot of women in that part of Texas now do is they go to Mexico and they get abortion pills. And they take them and hope for the best. Well, this probably isn't the best way to get your abortion care, especially since a lot of the pharmacists don't really know what the abortion pills are. A Cytotec, it's sold as an ulcer medication. And the pharmacist may not know the right dosage or how you take them to procure an abortion. So anyway, all over the country these things are happening. There are many states, I think there are now 6 or 7, that have only one clinic. Mississippi, the Dakotas, now Missouri. There are, Arizona just passed, and another state I'm blanking out on is poised to pass also, a law that requires doctors to tell patients that abortion is reversible. The medication abortion by pill is reversible. So you can take the pill, but then if you change your mind, you can reverse it by taking some other pills. This is not good medicine at all. But why? So why do they do it? They do it because they want to put out in the world the idea that women don't know what they're doing when they have an abortion. They have not made up their mind. They're very hesitant. Oh, what should I do? And they want to create this idea as part of their way of presenting abortion as a very marginal, dangerous procedure that the women really don't want to do. They're just being pushed into it by someone else. It's never a considered decision. So now doctors are being forced to say all this nonsense. It's really terrible. And what I often wonder is, when are doctors going to say, enough already? We're the doctors, not you in the state legislature. This stuff is nonsense. But that has not happened to enough. It has not happened vigorously enough. So anyway, this sort of thing is happening all over the country, even in New Jersey. Governor Christie, who has now come out as opposing abortion, closed either 5 or 6 Planned Parenthoods in New Jersey using financial reasons. This is very bad. Women from New Jersey are now coming to New York for their abortions because you can't get an abortion, I think, after, I forget if it's 20 weeks or a little bit later or a little bit sooner. But there's a real dearth of provision for abortion care, even in New Jersey, which is in the, a very central, urban, northeast, more or less blue state. So this is happening all over. In Pennsylvania, clinics have shut down, in Virginia, in North Carolina, and there are a few places where abortion access has become a little bit easier, for example, California, but mostly not. Mostly it's going the other way. And so I was thinking, there needs to be a book. What does a writer always think? There needs to be a book that sort of really kind of tries to get back to basics about what abortion is all about and how we've gotten off the track, both the people who oppose abortion and the people, some of the organizations that favor of it. I think that I argue in the book that they're not really putting out the right messaging. That their messaging kind of reinforces the stigmatization of abortion, although that's not at all what they're trying to do. So I wrote this book in which I try to sort of flip the popular way of seeing it. And instead of saying, oh, abortion is just so terrible, it's the worst thing in the world, it's very regrettable, what is it? It should be, as the Clintons used to say, safe, legal, and rare. I say, no, abortion should be safe, legal, and accessible. We don't know what the right amount of abortion is. There are plenty of women who are too poor to get an abortion in states that don't provide Medicaid abortion, or even some of the ones that do. If there was an abortion clinic on every street corner, there would be more of it. So putting the accent on the number of abortions is the wrong thing. We should put the accent on what do women need? What do women need and families need to have a good chance of having a good life, of having children when they're ready and able to take care of those children? That's what the goal should be. So I argue that abortion is legal, safe, accessible, even free abortion is a good thing for society. I say it's good for women, obviously. It's good for women. It's good for women not to have children when they're not ready to have them. It's good for women to have the number of children that they feel they can raise. And it's good for women to be able to do all the other things that we're here on earth to do, like get an education, get a job, get a better job, raise your children with enough resources. And it's good for men, which is something people don't often say. It's good for men because really it's not good for men to have all the children that they have no connection to, that they can't afford to be part of the raising of, that they just go through life thinking, oh, my children, where are they? Who are they? That's not good. And it's good for children. It's good for children to be wanted. It's good for children to be the right number, part of the right number for their parents to have. If you add up men, women, and children, what you've got is society. So abortion is good for society. And I think a lot about how a great deal of creativity and talent and opportunity is lost to, and happiness is lost to having a baby at the wrong time with the wrong person. This isn't good. It isn't good to feel, oh, I got pregnant. Now I have to have a baby. That means for the next 18 years I'm connected to this person I basically have no interest in or connection to, who's not good for me, and who is not a good parent to a child. Who benefits from that? Nobody. So that's one thing I try to do in my book, is show that abortion, which we really stigmatize a lot, is actually a good thing. And then I try to connect abortion with motherhood, because this is an interesting thing. We think, oh, here's this slut over here, she has an abortion. And here's this lovely person here, the mother. But these are the same women. These are the same women at different moments in their life. And among the sound bites that I have found really make people think is this one. 61% of women who have abortions are mothers. Think about that. That our stereotype of women who have abortions is, okay, the teenage slut, the slut in her 20-somethings, the college slut, she's always a slut, someone who just wants to have fun, the hard-hearted, evil career woman who wants to go on her European vacation and hates children. It's always a woman who is materialistic, frivolous, and overly sexual. And that's the stereotype of the woman who has abortions. But actually, that woman already has a child, more than half the time. So what does that say? Well, one thing that says is that you don't need her to force her to look at an ultrasound. She knows that what it means to give birth. She knows what it means to have a baby. She knows that she's got a, it's not a cantaloupe in there. She is making a decision based on the real life circumstances that she faces. And if people are truly upset of the idea of women having abortions, they should do so much more for mothers and for children and families than they do in this country. But that's not going to happen, and the pro-life movement they're not out there on the front line saying, oh, let's have a family allowance so that everybody can, raise their children well. Let's have paid maternity and paternity leave. Let's bring back welfare. Let's bring back food stamps. No, the pro-life movement, which in the book I don't call the pro-life movement because that's propaganda language, I'm just using it here for shorthand. The pro-life movement has thrown in its lot with the Republican Party, and the Republican Party, what they want to do is cut everything that benefits low-income men, women, and children. So, right down to Medicaid coverage, the Medicaid expansion that can come with Obamacare. They don't want that. So even though I have to say that most of the people that would be benefited by that are poor women. So anyway, and I think, what I say is that abortion is an aspect of motherhood. It's an aspect of planning, of family planning. It's an aspect of having your children at the right time when you can be a good mother. And women know when that is. And if you never want to have kids, which some women do not, then that's an aspect of motherhood too, because that's saying, and since you know yourself, you may very well be right, saying, no, motherhood isn't for me, I wouldn't be good at it, I don't want to devote myself to it, so I'm not going to do it. Well, that is a way of dealing with motherhood that makes a lot of sense if you're that kind of, if you have those feelings. And people shouldn't be stigmatized for having those feelings. We've got a lot of people in the world. People shouldn't feel that they have to have them, have more. So anyway, those are some of the things I talk about in the book. And one thing I get into is the stigmatization of abortion and how this is not just something you find on the anti-abortion side of the aisle, but because these ideas have become so embedded in our culture, you find the same ideas showing up in a defensive way as part of pro-choice messaging. So, for example, the anti-choice people say, women really don't know what they're doing. They're pushed into having abortions by their boyfriends, their family, their pimp, their drug dealer. It's always some really sordid story. And by the abortionists, as they call them, themselves. Now how this happens, I don't know. It's not like abortion doctors are out there in the streets hauling people in. But anyway, that's the idea, that the woman is not a fully morally responsible, thoughtful person who has really considered what she's doing. So to counteract that, the pro-choice movement says, oh, no, you're wrong. It's not a frivolous decision at all. It's the most difficult and hardest decision a woman ever makes. It's an agonizing decision. Well, I'm sure for some women that's true. A woman who part of her wants to have a baby might feel that way. But I think for most women, it's not a difficult decision. It's something they know right away is the way it has to be if they're going to keep their life on track. And so when you say it's the most difficult, hardest, most agonizing decision, the message you're giving out is, well, it's really a terrible thing to do, but women think very hard about it before they do this terrible thing. And you're also saying, well, if it isn't the hardest, most difficult, most agonizing decision you've ever made, it kind of should be. Maybe you are one of those frivolous sluts that just can waltz off to the clinic and move on as if nothing ever happened. So I think that there's a lot of ways in which the pro-choice movement would be well advised to take a stronger stand, to just be more, step up to the plate and say what I say in my book, which is just to claim it, say, no, this is the way the world, it's the way the world has always been. Abortion, anthropologists say abortion is at least 4,000 years old. It's found in every society. It's found in societies that have never heard of feminism or modern ways of life, and in which having large numbers of children is expected. But that doesn't mean that you have every child that you're pregnant with. It's part of life, and we don't acknowledge that. We expect women from the time they are, a woman has, immense decades of fertility from the time, so let's say from the time you're 15 to the time you're 50, that's 35 years. You have to practice, you have to manage your fertility perfectly. You have to do this perfectly. Now think how hard that is, given, birth control is quite fallible. It's much better than not using birth control. But it isn't perfect, and some methods require cooperation from your male partner, the condom, for example, it requires having a doctor, having money for the prescription. There's a lot of slips that can come in your birth control coverage, and yet you have to do this thing right every time. And this is sex we're talking about. Sex is not where people tend to put most of their, a lot of forethought. That's probably why we're all here. If people thought about it more, the human race might have died out. I don't know, but they just say, no, I think I'll just watch television tonight. I think that we need to deal with all these issues around reproduction in a much more practical, social-minded way. And the idea that the way it is now, it is all on the woman. It's all on the woman. Not only does she have to manage her fertility, she has to often raise the child herself. She doesn't get much help from society at all. She often doesn't get enough help from the father. Men kind of get a pass in this whole discussion. This too at a time when life is becoming, as so many of us know so well, is becoming more difficult. There's not an automatic route to economic prosperity for most people. You ask yourself, who benefits when children are born at a bad time for their parents? The parents have no money. We know that poverty is not good for children, and yet we do nothing to really, really change that circumstance, even though we talk about it. We talk about it as if, here's a pilot program, that's really great. Here's something that some politician wants to do. But we don't really do much for low-income people. And we do less for low-income people now than we did 10 or 20 years ago. To me, abortion restrictions are kind of like the last straw for struggling people that, it's at any moment you could be sandbagged by a pregnancy, and then, good Lord, you really have a hard time dealing with that. Either way, if you want an abortion, that can be quite difficult to obtain, and if you have a baby, that also is difficult to obtain. And so I talk about, if we see abortion and motherhood together, then we can start to talk about how do we create a more caring society? How do we value children? It's quite remarkable to me that the big solution from abortion opponents is, and this is another thing I talk about in the book, is, adoption. Have the baby, it's just 9 months out of your life, and of course an excruciating however many hours that are actually kind of dangerous to give birth, and then you can give the baby up and make another couple happy. And I feel this is so demeaning. This is so demeaning. First of all, the experience of pregnancy and childbirth is big. It's big physically, it's big emotionally, and it's big socially. It's not that easy to be a pregnant woman, give birth, and then put your child up for adoption, and then just go back to your life as if nothing has happened. And I'm not saying that sometimes that is the decision a woman makes, and it's a good decision for her. And it's a much better decision now than it used to be when it was very coercive, socially coercive, when you had to give up your child or be deemed, completely disrespectable and exiled from your community, and your family would disown you and all like that. I think there's a lot less of that now, although I'm sure it exists some. But the idea that that's the solution, and this is something, is ridiculous, and this is something that some people like Hillary Clinton at one point said. People love to say this, that adoption is the solution for abortion. Well, first of all, I don't think abortion is a problem that needs a solution, except for people to pay for it and have better birth control and all the rest. But the idea that of the around a little bit over 1 million abortions a year that take place in this country, a significant number of them could be, it could result in adoption instead, is ridiculous. That isn't going to happen. Women don't want to do this mostly, and the minute social strictures loosened up a little bit about at the beginning of the 70s, and abortion became legal, but it also became more respectable and okay to be a single mother, women stopped doing this, and now only about 1% of white women give up their child for place their child for adoption, and almost no black women do this. So the idea that this is going to flip around and people will say, oh, fine, I'll have a baby and give it away, is just ridiculous. It's not going to happen. It's a very painful thing to do, and it is not going to become significantly more popular. Also, if it did, who would adopt these babies? That's the other thing. There is an idea out there that there's an infinite number of people who want to adopt children, but that's really not true. There are not that many who really want to go all the way through it. And the numbers that you get from adoption advocacy groups are basically anyone who has ever made a phone call expressing interest in adoption. I mean, they're advocacy numbers that all advocacy groups tend to use, the ones that make them seem big and important and like everybody loves them. But in fact, there isn't that much adoption in America, and there's very little adoption of stranger children, the children of people that aren't in your family or in some way known to you. So anyway, that's another thing that it just really gets to me, the idea that women are supposed to produce these children and then just give them to someone else as a good altruistic deed. And as I say, if somebody wants to do that, fine. I'm not saying it's even a bad thing to do, but it's not something we should expect, and it's not something that social policy should be based on. And it really does convey this idea that, oh, well, you're out there to help other people by making this enormous investment, both physical, emotional, and social, of yourself. And that isn't something we tend to ask of people in this country. So anyway, so I wrote this book because I wanted to turn all that around and just start a conversation in a different place. Instead of the usual, yes, abortion is terrible, terrible, but if we make it criminal, if we ban it, then women will have illegal abortions, and that's very dangerous. That's sort of the bottom line for a lot of people. And I have friends who've said that to me. That's the only reason they favor legal abortion, is the dangers of illegal abortion, which in countries where abortion is illegal, in some of them, there are higher rates of abortion than here. For example, Brazil, where abortion is very, very criminalized, and it's very common. I wrote this book, and something that I want to tell you about really surprised me, which was that when it was reviewed, and like all people who write books, I spend a lot of time worrying about how, what kind of reviews is it going to get, and I thought, oh, it's really going to get terrible reviews. Because it will be reviewed by people who want to say, oh, well, Katha goes too far and all like this. I got a number of reviews that began with the reviewer saying, I had an abortion. And to me, this was both very surprising, because these were well-known writers with a lot to lose. But it also struck me that maybe this shows you the conversation is turning around, that people have really had it with the religious right, which is, you know, a big part of the anti-choice movement, with the religious right telling everybody else how to live. They've had it with the kind of the whole anti-woman tinge of a lot of our politics. And they've had it with having to creep around and be quiet and silent about something that they did that they themselves are not ashamed of. I've been very happy about that, and I feel that the book is a little bit part of a movement of people coming out of the closet, of people talking about abortion in a different way, sometimes in a way that is a little bit shocking. For example, some of you may know that a young woman named Emily Letts she filmed her abortion at a clinic in New Jersey, the Cherry Hill Clinic. And it was, I thought, a wonderful thing to do, although it does, you know, when you say she filmed her, she put it up on YouTube, you know, it does at first sound like really very exhibitionistic. But her point was, look, the clinic is clean. Look, you can see the clinic is clean. I'm okay. It takes 5 minutes. I'm not hysterical. I'm dealing with it all just fine. I thought that was actually a wonderful thing to do. And somebody else live tweeted her abortion. There's just a lot. And then someone live tweeted her IUD insertion, which is something that a lot of women are, it's a very good method of birth control, but it's expensive and people are afraid of it. So because it's reputedly painful, but she showed, well, it's not that painful. Go ahead, do it. So I feel that there's a kind of, especially among young women, there's a kind of coming out of the closet about abortion, and which is what you would expect, because in addition to the 61% of women who have had abortions who are mothers, something like 1 in 3 women in America will have an abortion at some point during her life, at least one. And that might be going down a little bit now as birth control becomes better. But it's still very high. And if something is 1 in 3 people, 1 in 3 women, and each of those women has a partner, a friend, a parent, a relative, somebody is going to the clinic with them, somebody is lending them money, somebody is driving them, they're confiding in someone. Someone is making them a cup of tea afterwards. This is an awful lot of people. This is like half the people in the country we're talking about. And I do believe that ultimately something that half the people in the country are involved in is not something that can ultimately be just legislated out of existence. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts about the book, and I'm going to read you a little bit. And have I talked? I'm supposed to talk for 45 minutes. Have I done that? I tend to talk a lot. I'm going to read you a little the introduction, and then we can have questions and answers. Okay, this gives you a little flavor of what the book is about. I never had an abortion, but my mother did. She didn't tell me about it, but from what I pieced together after her death from a line in her FBI file, which my father, the old radical, had requested along with his own, it was in 1960. So like most all abortions back then, it was illegal. The agent who kept her file wrote that she was in the care of a physician for gynecological problems that spring, which I like to think was his chivalrous way of protecting her from further investigation. But perhaps he too was in the dark and only put down what he knew. For a while, I was angry at her, the way one is angry at the dead for keeping their secrets till it is too late to ask questions, and the way one can be angry at one's mother for having a life outside her child's ken. I thought she owed me this bit of woman-to-woman realism and honesty, instead of, or at least in addition to, tales of the 9 marriage proposals she had received by the time she met my father, and falling in love with him at first sight, and eloping with him 3 months later when she had just turned 21. Knowing about her abortion might have helped me. It might have given me a truer sense of life as a young, very romantic woman who had no idea what was what. When I ask myself why I've been so preoccupied with abortion rights for so long, I wonder if learning about my mother's abortion, its illegality, the fact that she didn't tell my father, the unknowability of her reasons or her feelings or the experience itself is part of the answer. I find myself wondering, was whoever performed the procedure a real doctor? Was he kind to her, respectful? Did he do his best not to cause pain? Did she take someone with her? I remember her talking with her friend Judy about how another woman they knew had had a D&C, which was often a euphemism for abortion back then. So maybe her circle of women steered her to a good practitioner. Maybe her friend Judy sat in the waiting room, if there was a waiting room, and took her home in a taxi afterward and made her a cup of tea. I hope so. It would have been so wrong if my tender, fragile mother had had to go through all that by herself. What did it mean that my mother had to break the law to end a pregnancy? It meant that America basically said to her, "It's the 20th century, so we're going to let you vote and go to college and have a family and a job. Not a great job, not the one you wanted, because unfortunately that job is for men. And you'll get your own charge accounts at Bonwitz and Altman's and your own subscription to the Heritage Book Club. But underneath all that normal, forward-looking, mid-20th century, middle-class New York life is the secret underground life of women. And that you must manage outside the law. If you are injured or die or are trapped by the police, you'll only have yourself to blame, because the real reason you are here on earth is to produce children, and you shirk that duty at your peril." I wonder if my mother knew that her own grandmother died of an abortion after bearing 9 children back in Russia during the First World War, or if her mother kept that family secret from her as she kept her secret from me. Women's lives are different now, so much so we're in danger of forgetting how they used to be. Legalizing abortion didn't just save women from death and injury and fear of arrest. It didn't just make it possible for women to commit to education and work and free them from shotgun marriages and too many kids. It changed how women saw themselves as mothers by choice, not fate. As long as abortion is available to her, even a woman who thinks it is tantamount to murder is making a choice when she keeps a pregnancy. She may feel like she has to have that baby, Jesus or her parents or her boyfriend is telling her she has to do it, but actually she doesn't have to do it. She is choosing to have that baby. Roe v. Wade gave women a kind of existential freedom that is not always welcome. Indeed, it is sometimes quite painful, but that has become part of what women are. One thing Roe v. Wade didn't do, though, was make abortion private. And you all know that Roe v. Wade was the 1973 decision by the Supreme Court that made abortion in the first 2 trimesters of pregnancy legal. Sometimes I look up from reading about the latest onslaught against abortion rights. While I've been writing this introduction, Louisiana passed laws like those that are forcing dozens of Texas clinics to close. Missouri legislators passed a 72-hour waiting period requirement for its sole remaining clinic. And a Montana health center that performed abortions as part of a family practice was trashed beyond repair, allegedly by the son of a prominent local abortion opponent. And I think, how strange. Justice Harry Blackmun's majority opinion in Roe v. Wade was all about privacy. But the most private parts of a woman's body and the most private decisions she will ever make have never been more public. Everyone gets to weigh in, even, according to the 5 conservative Catholic men on the Supreme Court, her employer. If the CEO of the Hobby Lobby craft store chain, a secular business, decides that emergency contraception and IUDs are abortifacients and banned by God, he is entitled to keep them out of her health coverage, even though he's wrong about how those methods work. It's religion. Facts don't matter. especially when the facts involve women's liberty. Maybe Blackmun's mistake was thinking that a woman could claim privacy as a right in the first place. A man's home is his castle, but a woman's body has never been wholly her own. Historically, it's belonged to her nation, her community, her father, her family, her husband. In 1973, when Roe was decided, marital rape was legal in every state. Why shouldn't her body belong to a fertilized egg as well? And if that egg has a right to live and grow in her body, why shouldn't she be held legally responsible for its fate and be forced to have a cesarean if her doctor thinks it's best, or be charged with a crime if she uses illegal drugs and delivers a stillborn or sick baby? Incidents like this have been happening all over the country for some time now. Denying women the right to end a pregnancy is the flip side of punishing women for conduct during pregnancy, and even if not punishing, monitoring. In the spring of 2014, a law was proposed in the Kansas state legislature that would require doctors to report every miscarriage, no matter how early in pregnancy. You would almost think the people who have always opposed women's independence and full participation in society were still at it. They can't push women all the way back, but they can use women's bodies to keep them under surveillance and control. That thought gives rise to a wish. Surely I find myself daydreaming. There is something, some substance already in common use that women could drink after sex or at the end of the month that would keep them unpregnant with no one the wiser. Something you could buy at the supermarket, or maybe several things you could mix together, items so safe and so ordinary they could never be banned, that you could prepare in your own home, that would flush your uterus and leave it pink and shiny and empty without you ever needing to know if you were pregnant or about to be. A brew of Earl Grey, Lapsang Souchong, and ground cardamom, say, or a Coca-Cola with a teaspoon of Nescafe and a dusting of cayenne pepper. Things you might have on your shelves right now, just waiting for some clever person to put them together, some stay-at-home mother with a chemistry degree rattling around her kitchen late at night. Then I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Think of it, no pharmacist refusing to fill your prescription for birth control or Plan B, no religious fanatics following you through the clinic parking lot screaming baby killer and taking down your license plate number, no need to notify your parents or get their permission. The whole elaborate panopticon that governs abortion today, gone. RU486, the French abortion pill, now better known as mifepristone, was supposed to accomplish that. Any doctor could prescribe it in his office, and no one need be the wiser. A 1999 New York Times Sunday magazine cover story called it "The Little White Bombshell That May Well Reconfigure the Politics and Perception of Abortion," pushing abortion earlier and reintegrating it with regular medical practice. It's the age-old hope that a single technological or scientific advance will once and for all resolve a social issue. A fantasy that means forgetting that the new thing will be embedded in the existing system and involve the existing human beings. For a variety of reasons, difficulties obtaining the drug, laws that made medication abortions as heavily regulated as surgical ones, fear of abortion opponents, few doctors not already involved in abortion care took up the challenge of prescribing it. That women want early abortion, that many women prefer medication to surgery, that especially in rural areas it would be a lot simpler and cheaper and less stressful for women to get a prescription from their local OBGYN or GP than to travel long distances to a clinic, that it would be a good thing to free women from having to run a gauntlet of protesters, none of that mattered. What women want in their abortion care is simply not important. Trust women is a popular motto in the pro-choice movement. It sounds a little sentimental, doesn't it? Part of that old sisterhood is powerful feminism it is fashionable to mock today. But trust women doesn't mean that every woman is wise or good or has magical intuitive powers. It means that no one else can make a better decision because no one else is living her life. And since she will have to live with that decision, not you and not the state legislature or the Supreme Court, chances are she is doing her best in a tight spot. Dr. George Tiller, who provided abortion care in Wichita, Kansas, and was one of a handful of doctors to perform abortions after 24 weeks, wore a Trust Women button. Unlike the vast majority of Americans, he did not assume that a woman seeking an abortion late in pregnancy was lazy or stupid or too busy having sex to have attended to matters early on. He did not assume that her body ceased to be her own because she was pregnant. Well, you see what trusting women got him. In 2009, he was gunned down in church by Scott Roeder, a far-right Christian anti-government, anti-abortion activist who thought he had the right to commit murder because, as he told a reporter, preborn children's lives were in imminent danger. And I think I'm going to have to stop reading now because I want there to be time for questions. Anyway, that's a little taste of the book, which is short. I tried to write it in a very accessible, entertaining way, and I hope you'll take a look at it. So, questions? And I'm going to call in students by preference if there are any. So just display how youthful and questing you are. Yeah.
You made a lot of very strong and beautiful points, but I just wanted to know, like, I know you've been doing this for a long time. How do you react to someone who is completely against your views? Like, how do you kind of go about, like, making it sort of like, so you're not being rude, and I don't know, like, how do you kind of go about that? Because that can be really, really hard.
It is hard. And not just about this subject, but any subject where people really disagree with you, it can be quite hard to have a calm and reasonable discussion. And I think that it's especially hard in an issue like this, where people are coming at this issue with a whole different set of facts, and each side thinks their facts are right, and each side will refuse to accept the corrections that come from the other side. I don't have that problem since I am right, but for example, I read every day a website, the email from a website called lifenews.net. And if you were to read that, you would think, my God, these abortion doctors, or abortionists as they call them, my God, they're just the most evil people in the world, and abortion is incredibly dangerous, and people are always dying and having to be sent off to the emergency room in an ambulance, and in fact, these things are very rare. And abortionists are not evil people, although as in every field of medicine, there are some practitioners who aren't, so great and compassionate. And some people that are just in it for the money and all like that. And you have to remember that. You have to remember, we're talking about a large field of medicine here. A lot of things happen. But nobody is having, dentistnews.net where they keep track of, more people die, a lot more people die at the hands of dentists. A lot more people die from colonoscopies and all kinds of very routine medical procedures. But you're absolutely right. It can be very hard to have this discussion. And I'm probably not very good at it because I don't really have the calm, I love you demeanor that a person who's really good at this has. Yeah.
How do you deal with mothers that can't have children and you bring the subject up to them?
I have good friends who are infertile, and that's a very good question because, but all of my friends who are infertile or have had great difficulty conceiving are pro-choice. I mean, just because you can't have a baby doesn't mean you want to force somebody else to have one. But I think emotionally, I understand what you mean, that you're thinking, I'm having such a hard time, and here's this person who can do this thing, they don't even want to do it, this is so horrible. Yeah, life is full of difficult situations. Life is full of people, right? Unfortunately, life is full of people. And people aren't always, cold and rational. So they might think, yes, I think abortion should be legal, but I still think you're really a bitch for having an abortion. People can do that, and that can be very hard to move people off that. Did you speak already? No, okay, yeah.
How do you respond to women or people who are pro-life and say that you can't handle the responsibilities of pregnancy and you shouldn't be having sex?
Oh, that's such a great question, because that is in fact exactly what they say. A lot of this comes down to different ideas about sex and women having sex, especially. There are people who think, well, sex is something for intimacy, and it's for pleasure, and it's for any number of 1,000 other reasons, and it's part of life, and everybody tries most people try very hard to have a lot of it. And then there are people who think of sex as more, it's like a contract to have a baby. That you should only have sex, and this was the original Christian idea, was you shouldn't have sex at all, and then they kind of had to modify it when the world wasn't coming to an end as quickly as they thought it would, that okay, you can have it to have a baby, but you can't enjoy it. And then that was sort of like, oh, you can enjoy it, you can have a baby, if you're going to have a baby, you can enjoy it, but but you have to have the baby no matter what. And that's sort of where they are now. And you have to be married. That's the other thing, I forgot that. You have to be married. And I think that that's a very, very deep division. And I think at bottom, the opposition to abortion is about opposition to modern sexual mores and to women's liberation. Old-fashioned word, but I think that's really true. And I think it is part of a resistance to modern life as we're living it. They want the old ways, and they think that they can bring them back if they just make it harder, if they just punish women enough. And that's not really true, but they can certainly make life miserable for a lot of people, and that's what they're doing now. Yeah, back there. You.
I was wondering, how do you think as the newer generation, obviously, we can start to reclaim our abortion rights back from what we lost before?
Good question. How can we reclaim our abortion rights? Well, I think people have to become a little more energetic and active. I know a lot of people that are, everyone I know really basically is pro-choice, but do they do much about it? No, they don't. And there is a lot that people can do. They can volunteer, some of it is still defensive, but volunteering for clinic defense at a clinic is a great thing to do, because a lot of these clinics, are incredibly beset by protesters. And they can join or start an abortion fund to help raise funds for abortions for women who can't afford them. That's a wonderful thing. And there is a New Jersey abortion fund. You can find it online. And I'm sure they would love to have people from here getting involved in fundraising and raising awareness and volunteering in all different kinds of ways. And then I think, voting helps. Voting is very important. I think that the anti-choice side is much more focused on their goal than our side is. I shouldn't say our side, because maybe there's some anti-choice people here, and I'd like to hear from them if there are, but their side, the anti-choice people are very passionate, and they're very focused, and they vote on this issue. They are many times more likely to vote, be single-issue voters than pro-choice people are. And over time, that has an effect, because state legislators, most of whom I'm willing to bet don't care one way or the other. They're just after getting reelected and amassing power. Over time, they're going to say, well, this is what my donors want. This is what wins an election. So I think every form of visibility is a good thing. And registering people to vote and making sure they get to the polls, because students, I think, have a hard time with that in some ways, the way the laws are set up for registration, but also, students are, they're busy. So I think there is an awful lot that we can do. You know, maybe some of you in this room will take it up here. That would be really great. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you feel, or how do you respond to people that tell teenage or younger women that find abortion to be an option? How do you respond to them when they say that they're using abortion as a birth control option?
I would say it is a birth control option. That's what it is. It's what happens when birth control fails or you're not using birth control. That's the next step. And it's not as good as birth control because birth control is just much more simple, and then you don't have to go through all the things I've described to get your abortion. But if for one reason or another someone isn't using birth control or isn't using it religiously enough, as it were, or has a gap in their coverage, then their choices are, I'm going to have a baby or I'm going to have an abortion. And I think for a lot of people, the baby is the much more serious, long life affecting decision to make. But I think, you know, people say, you're absolutely right though, people think, oh, she was careless, she should have a baby. Now think about that. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. Even if you're incredibly careless about birth control, that doesn't mean you should become a mother. It means you should learn from your experience and be a little more careful the next time. But what we really need is we need to have better birth control. You know, and this is the great thing, and we need to have better coverage of birth control, and this is a good thing that Obamacare has done. It includes birth control as a preventive medicine, and you're supposed to get it with no copay, and it's really helped a lot of people. But what we really need is birth control that is less fallible, because over time, it's easy to have a slip. Everybody's had a pregnancy scare, haven't they? I mean, you know, maybe you're all young, so maybe not you, but you know, by the time you're up there in age, you've probably had an experience of like, oh my God, where is that period? And this is because life is always trying to undermine your rational side, and always trying, and it's difficult to be perfect in every way. You know, people do other things. This is interesting. People do other things that where they're careless, and if it works out, you never think of it again. Like, let's say you're walking along and you almost knock over that Chinese vase. Oh my God! If you knock it over, you have to pay thousands of dollars to the owner of that vase. You're in big trouble. But if you don't knock it over, you never think about it. But it's the same thing that you did. It was just like some little teeny, you know, eighth of an inch. That was the difference between the life and death of that vase. And there are many things you do when you're driving, you know. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has moments when they zone out. Most of the time it's okay. Every now and then it's not okay. And even so, with birth control, you can really try to be very careful, but you know, you might not succeed 100% of the time. Yeah?
You mentioned that majority of the women who do have abortion, they're okay with their decision and they, you know, it's okay, they don't have an excruciating process. What would you say to the women who have?
Oh, you know, that's a good question. I would say that there are resources out. I would say people have all different kinds of reactions to the things that happen in life. And if someone is upset about their abortion, I think there are resources out there. For example, there's a group called Exhale and a group called Voice. And these are, is it called Voice? I think it is. That will just talk to you and listen to your experience, and you can talk to other people who have had the same feelings. It's very important to be able to express your real feelings about the things that happen to you, not just about abortions, about everything. So I would say, you know, reach out and talk to someone who's not going to give you a big guilt trip. Talk to someone who is really interested in what you have to say, and will help you, come to some peace. But yeah, I don't mean to scant the people that have trouble with the decision, because they exist too. Yes?
What would you say to someone who is pro-abortion, pro-choice, and they want to be involved with it, they want to help? However, what would your advice be to those people who are afraid of the radicals who may, maybe come after them in really extreme scenarios? What would you?
You mean anti-choice people?
Yes.
Well, I'll just tell you that I've been all over the country talking about this book. And in some places where I've talked, there have been policemen there, marshals, because they were afraid that the some violent, crazy anti-abortion person would show up. They never did. They never did. I think that you shouldn't assume that, if you go be a clinic escort, then they're going to, shoot you or something. There is a very crazy and violent element in that movement, but there are also a lot of people who are very decent and a lot of people who are just like us, only they have different ideas. So I wouldn't be deterred. I would be careful. And maybe just start by getting involved in a way that feels safe to you and see how that goes. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier in your discourse that one of the main reasons of abortion is that, women think, having a child gets in the way. So I have a, scenario that I wrote down, and I feel like, do you think a deeper question lies, a more existential question lies, with the whole example for if a woman of, let's say, a mother of 10 children, with no abortions, comes up to you and she tells you that she's traveled the world and she's seen 7 wonders of the world, all 7 of them. And versus a mother of 3, right, with 5 abortions. She comes up to you and she tells you, she's traveled as well, but not as much as the mother of 10, who's seen all 7 wonders. The mother of 3, with 5 abortions, is seeing only 1 wonder of the world because, she's paying back the bills, that piled up with the 5 abortions. What do you think?
Well, I think that would not be a very realistic thought experiment. It's an interesting story. I want to see those 7 wonders. And I only have 1 child and I haven't seen them. Abortion is not that expensive. It's not as expensive as having all those extra children that she didn't have. There's that. But that mother of 10, bless her, if that's what she wanted to do, fine. I am not in favor of, people not having children they want to have. And some women want to have a lot of children. And some women don't want to have any. And each person, as in other areas of life, we want to maximize people's freedom to make a good decision for themselves. So God bless the mother of 10 and her travels. And God bless the mother of 3 and her travels. Why does everybody have to lead the same life? That's what I would say. Yeah.
It's honored to ask you a question to speak with you and have you here today. But I used to be very religious and understand just side with the people who were against abortion. I always had that mindset. But as I broke out of it, I'm thinking more my thoughts more liberal and my thoughts are liberating. I'm gaining more knowledge. It's not just an issue of life and death. It's a women's issue, and I understand the feminist perspective. So I've always now on the side, I'm all for abortion. I understand it benefits everybody, it benefits me and all society. The one thing that I've always, trying to grasp the idea is the fetus itself. I'm not sure how to grasp the idea, because the fetus is going to be leaving the body. It's no longer going to develop. Just trying to think, because grass, like, what's going on with the fetus?
Well, you know, there's a chapter in the book about personhood. What is a person? Because that's also a very powerful argument made by anti-abortion people, which is that from the very, very beginning, from the time it's a fertilized egg, not even implanted in the womb, but just hanging out, it's a person. To me, this is an idea that makes no sense at all, because it doesn't have any of the qualities that a person has. It doesn't have a head, it doesn't have a mind, it doesn't have self-consciousness, it doesn't have thoughts, it doesn't have feelings, it has no social relationships. It is just a fertilized egg. And I agree with you, the closer it gets, the more developed it gets, the more it looks like a baby. And you know, I think that there is a point at which a lot of people would say, you know, no, it's too late. And it's very hard to get an abortion after viability in this country. Viability being defined as when the fetus could exist on its own outside the mother's body. But you know, in the end, I think the decision has to be hers, because it's her body and it's her life that is the thing that's right before you. And if she, you know, gets to one of the 3 or 4 places in the country that will perform a late-term abortion, you know, I'm not going to be the person who says, no, you have to have that baby. If there was an abortion clinic on every street corner, those late-term abortions that everybody finds very distressing would be, they're very few now, it's like 1%, but they would be even less. But it's always going to happen because things happen late in pregnancy. The woman, you know, with the woman's health and safety and other things like that. Yeah, time to go? Back to class?
Well, it is 3:15, and I know a lot of people have their next classes.
Okay.
And so I'd like to thank all of you for coming.
Thank you so much.
Katha.